Okay, welcome back, Kirby. I'm so
Hi.
excited to have you back to talk about plant medicine again. So, you had a unique experience. You went to Bali, and altogether, how many ayahuasca ceremonies did you have altogether while you were there?
Well, it was actually psilocybin. So it was
Oh, yeah.
it was the mushrooms. I have done some other plant medicine since then, but my first experience was with just the mushrooms. And the other thing too is it also doesn't always really matter which plant medicine you take.
So true.
The energy will kind of do what it needs to be done within the body. That's how I personally feel, and a lot of other people feel that way as well. But that's a whole nother story.
Yes,
But
yes.
I did five different, I guess you would say, ceremonies,
Yeah,
and I was really happy for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was super removed from the world, so it allowed me to be in this healing spiritual bubble. And because I was in Bali for 30 days, it allowed kind of that time to still be within it instead of like, oh,
yeah.
I'm gone away for 5 days and I do some plant medicine and then I immediately have to jump back into the real world, you know?
Yes, yeah.
I was really lucky in that way. I never even intended because I kind of like I said before, I was kind of summoned where I felt like, oh, I'm meant to be doing these, right? So
Yeah.
I never even intended to do them that many times, but it kind of just happened the way that it happened. So the good part is if you've never done plant medicine, I obviously you want to kind of start out and ease your way into your whole experience, right? You don't want to just like jump off the deep end and take like a whole bunch of plant medicine and have like
Yeah.
some crazy experience. So the first two times were quite mild, which I really appreciated because it just allowed me to honor the medicine and see how my body felt and connect more with my body with the
Yeah.
experience. And I did have some pivotal moments, but there wasn't like a lot of deep purging. There wasn't any crazy downloads or any huge like familial memories that came about. I really was just kind of navigating it. And that was really important for me because there is different sensations that you feel within the body. And
Yeah.
those two experiences, I feel like were about 5 days apart. And in between there, integration wise, it allowed me to just kind of navigate initially what my body felt like and what did I feel like the days afterwards. I realized, I think after the second one, that it's really important to kind of have some body work done the days, the day following or maybe 2 days following after a plant medicine ceremony because so many things kind of get brought up emotionally and energetically, and then our physical body still stores so much of this. So I realized that when I had even just like a deep massage or even like sometimes even just really deep stretching, I'll kind of allowed my body to actually cleanse and clear even deeper and kind of integrate and like allow all of that medicine to kind of marinate within my body a bit more. So that was some of the first things that were really important, as well as, and this was lucky for me because I didn't have to like jump back into things, but
Yeah.
allowing yourself the space and the silence to really sit in your body, right? I was
Yeah.
able to go and just sit in nature, sit at the beach for hours and just allow myself to kind of ponder all of the things that I had felt within the body.
Right.
It's not just physically, it's all the pieces. It's mentally, it's emotionally, it's actually like connecting in your brain in a much bigger way because these, plant medicines, it's been proven that it like reawakens these pieces that have just been closed off for years. So
Right. Right.
that really allowed me to marinate, I would say. That's kind of like the best word. I got to marinate in it a bit. And then it was my third, I think the third one where it was kind of like my body was like, hey, you have some stuff. And I was just thinking, so it's so funny too, when you do plant medicine and you don't have like a super deep experience, you think like, oh, I'm good, right? Like
It's like the
I'm so
opposite. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm so healed. And I was like, oh, plant medicine is like, I kind of got a little bit cocky. I was like, oh, plant medicine is like, I'm so good.
Yeah.
And literally, it's like all of my spirit guides and my high self was like, girl, you're silly. Like, you ready for this?
Right. Right.
The other thing I will say too, which I did experience as well, and I'll explain in a second, is The environment and the weather is also kind of really important for what is going on. Like, what is happening with the moons at that time? Like, is it like a
True.
dark, dreary, dready day? Is it like rainy and kind of gross and like dark in ways? Like, because that kind of will allow you to kind of go a bit darker too, because it's like what's happening in nature and then you're consuming nature, right? Like, you're becoming one with what's happening. That can allow it to kind of dive a bit further than you may have intended. And so my third experience was a lot darker, and it was for two reasons. Number one, on that day, it was kind of more of a rainier, not like very like happy, sunny. And I really personally like to do plant medicine connected directly with nature. So you're like in nature, you're
Yes.
experiencing it, you're like really one with all of it. I really highly recommend doing it in that way. So already the day wasn't like the best day, but I was like being guided and I was like, okay, this is gonna be fine. But
Yes.
then there also had been some tension that had come up, or I don't even think there was something that came up in my family, but I mentally was like marinating on issues from my family. And so I had a lot on my mind in that way. Then we had like this. And so then intention wise, I'm pretty sure I went into the healing with a slightly broad, but kind of specific as well. And that's the thing too with intentions. I said before, like you can be more specific or non-specific, but I was like, I really want to experience some deeper healing. Well, that's exactly what happened. And
Yes.
so on that day, it allowed me to really dive into some, it felt more of like a scarier experience. But again, like I was explaining, you feel all of this within your body. So I cried a lot on that third experience. And I really kind of got to feel almost like the wrath of like what plant medicine can do. But it forced me, right? It thrust me in. I physically was feeling the fear that I had been holding on to. I physically was feeling all of that worry. I had tons of memories, like family stuff just was like purging and purging. I had all this anger, right? Like we kind of start expressing all those things that were hiding within. There was deep sadness, deep anger, all of that. So that night afterwards, and this is the other thing too, that when I do plant medicine, and so obviously with ayahuasca, there's a purging that
Yes.
happens. You can have purging with mushrooms as well. But I feel like that's usually only if you don't kind of prepare leading up into it. So I really only like to eat in the morning, wait for like 4 or 5 hours, and then take plant medicine. And then usually you
Okay.
don't have much in your belly to then purge out or whatnot. So I had basically eaten it about 10 a.m., taken them around, I would say 2 or 3 p.m. And then it depends on the medicine, but it can take 10 minutes where you start experiencing it, or it can take like an
Right.
hour to kind of allow the body to feel it. So it depends in that way. And then you
So
have a
in that
good
moment
six
when
to eight
all
hours.
the right, when in the moment you were in, were all the fears coming to the surface, the anger's coming to the surface, what's going on with your ego? Because it's a thin line where the ego can kind of come in as the protector and keep you in that state. And then there's
So
like the space where the soul can just be the observer.
the first two times, I think because I didn't take as much, I was a bit more aware of my ego. But on this
Okay.
third time, it's literally almost like my ego completely went out the window and I didn't have an ego. Like I
Yeah.
really was just, and it was kind of blowing my mind because I almost had never experienced life that way, right? Because we always have
Yeah.
our ego that's kind of that balance of like things that are happening, but my ego was like completely obliterated at this point. And I
Yeah.
think that I was shocked because it was like so clear, like each piece coming forward of like, no, this is literally holding you back because of this. No, like you've literally been carrying this. Like, no, this is there, this is there. And for about like 2, 3 hours, I was like really in the thick of it. And it was very, very uncomfortable. And then, especially with the amount of emotional purging that was happening on my end, it was really, I had opened up. So, when at the end of the night, after it had been, at 10 p.m. or so, maybe even later than that, because you're on these for like 6, 7, 8 hours or whatever,
Yeah.
11 p.m. Physically, when I started easing out, I felt so depleted and exhausted, but my body felt like clear, right? Like it felt like the huge weight had lifted because there was just a lot that bubbled up. And um, I allowed the emotional and the mental aspects kind of go forward right on their own. Like I didn't
Yeah.
fight it. If you fight what's kind of coming forth, it's going to be even more uncomfortable. And so
Which some people do. And it's like the suffering, the struggle. And I would call that like the ego attachment when you can't,
100%.
like you were able for some reason to let it go
I
and just
think it
be in
was
it.
only because I was like really kind of forced into it, because I feel like I would not have just let it go in that way. It was like it was kind of thrust upon me, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
isn't always like that, where there is this internal battle. And I've had other experience where you've had that back and forth and it's not easy, but once you do let yourself surrender to it, you realize like, oh, I'm really being shown these deeper hidden pieces that I've really been avoiding. And it really blew my mind. Like it was mind blowing for that. And so the integration on that after that third time and everything in that way was much more profound, because what I allowed to come forth, and that allowed me to, I actually felt physically different in that way, right? I didn't feel this huge energetic burden that I had been carrying for a super, super long time. And I have a lot of family trauma. So this was the
Yeah.
first time where I actually ever saw how much messed up fuckery is within my family system. And like I was
And
just
just how much you were physically walking around
physically,
with. Okay.
absolutely.
Now, some people just want to dive into plant medicine. As you know, people definitely abuse it and overuse it. If someone just wants to dive in and do this or dive in and do ayahuasca, but say they don't have a therapist or say they really aren't really on like the self work journey, what's your suggestion?
I definitely would say that we're each on our own journey here, but I will say, so after I did all 5 ceremonies, and then like I said, the 4 to 6 to 8 weeks afterwards, where that is still where integration is happening,
Yeah.
I think it is very important. I understand people are very anti-therapist, anti
Yeah.
this, anti that. I think you still need to have at least one person who can be there for you to verbalize what you are feeling within, and also for emotional and like comfort support. There are a lot of times in that 2 month after phase where
Right.
you need a hug, you need somebody to hold you, right? Because as you really let the purging keeps happening in that time. Like there are days where you're just like, why am I crying so much? Because you're just continuing to purge.
Yeah.
You need to be nurtured a little bit. And I can say that you don't have to have somebody, but it will make it so much easier for you and allow you to see like you don't have to always be fighting these battles on your own. And I completely understand it. I'm a Scorpio. I'm like hard-headed. I'm like, I've got everything. I don't need anyone. I can do all of this on my own. No, you literally kind of need at least a friend, even if you don't want to go to a therapist. Or there are like Facebook groups. There are things that you can at
Yes.
least connect to, which I feel like is very, very integral. You will spend the time on your own. You're going to do the journaling. It might be important again for you to do some body work, or for you to do some emotional releasing yourself, like tapping or breath work, things yourself that can help. But there is a place where having somebody to at least verbally express how you're feeling, be seen as this new
Yeah.
person, right? Because now you
Yeah.
actually are a version of who you were always meant to be. And that's terrifying, because you're like, hold on, what do you mean I don't have 37 masks, right? Like, where did
Yeah.
all these masks go? They've just purged off. And now you're like, oh, I don't know how to be, And you
Right.
kind of really need that. I feel like that's super important. And that is something that is potentially missing when people just go and jump in. Like I knew somebody and she went on like a 3 week thing, and then she did ayahuasca and she did mushrooms and she did this, she did all that. And then she didn't have anybody to help her with the integration afterwards. And she was messed up from the experience. And that's the part here where that's kind of very, very important, where you could almost derail yourself and go backwards from all the
Right.
healing that you've potentially done if you don't allow yourself that space there.
Well, because sometimes the old programming is like waiting for you when you get home, right?
It absolutely
So
is.
so you have like two worlds clashing. So you have like this new beautiful awakening programming, and then you have this old programming, and then if this old programming wins, you could be in complete chaos.
Well, absolutely. And that old programming is kind of comfort, right? That's what you've
Yeah,
known your whole life. So of course you're
right,
kind of like, oh, well, it's okay for me to go back to like drinking beers on my couch every night and like avoiding my emotions again because that then I don't have to deal with this. But like the whole
right,
point of the experience was for you to face these hidden pieces, bring these things about, and not allow yourself to carry those things. Like you still have to actively play a role as a human. Like the plant medicine doesn't just wipe out your bad habits
right.
and programming. Like you have to actively choose after the fact that you're not going to continue that way and you're going to allow yourself to sit in still kind of the uncomfortable emotions and feelings that you may be carrying and not lean into what's comfortable. Like, it
Absolutely.
really does take an active participant. It doesn't just like plant medicine is great, but it doesn't just like wipe everything out and then you're just like this blossoming flower and then there's like nothing else that happens. It's like there's
Right.
a process that kind of continues in that way for sure.
Absolutely. What do you think about microdosing? Because your beginning ceremonies might have been kind of like microdosing, a lower dose. Some people microdose
Yeah.
mushrooms and go to work.
Yeah.
Like what do you have any experience with that or
I have never really felt called to do microdosing.
yeah,
I kind of like to I'm kind of an all or nothing kind of person. So I'm like, if I want to like have an experience, I want to experience it. But I have read a lot of articles on how microdosing has helped people with severe anxiety, depression, and for somebody who suffered from severe anxiety and depression myself, I can completely understand that. And if that's something that maybe helps you take off the edge, because again, it can kind of remove that ego a bit and that overthinking, that overanalyzing.
right.
I think that it can be really beneficial in that way. And people have had really great results of it, even with chronic pain and things like that. It's been very beneficial. I would say if you're going to do that in a Western world, you know, maybe have some guidance of a holistic doctor or somebody who can kind of help you navigate through that because again there is going to be
Right.
healing that is going to be happening as a result of it. I personally feel like I like having a larger ceremony once or twice a year and allowing my body to do what it needs to do. And I don't feel called to do microdosing, but I know a lot of people who only feel called to do microdosing and they don't want to have these larger
The big
ceremonies.
ceremony. I'm the same because I always think about if I'm going to do something, it needs to be like in a sacred space and ceremony, which usually like isn't my home. So like
Yeah.
microdosing is usually like your day to day, and I haven't done it, and so it does give me like a weird feeling too. I'm like, oh, I want to like go away
Yeah.
and have a
I think
ceremony.
it's great and I have no judgment for anybody who
Yeah,
feels called into that path, but I also very much honor the sacredness of this indigenous healing and nature plant medicine that's available to us. And I just don't want people in the case of microdosing to disregard all of that because I think that that can be a thing too within the Western world where we
oh
just think
yeah,
these things are like, whatever. And I'm just like, no, you don't understand. Like these are really beautiful healing tools that are like
right.
very sacred and I just don't like I don't want to lose that piece of it because it is something that's so precious to me. And I do feel very like I honor in that way. And as especially as a white person, you're taking something that these indigenous cultures have continued for way
Right,
longer than
cultivated. Yes,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So it's not something for that I at this point in time,
right.
it's my first plant medicine ceremony. It's been 2.5 years at this point. I still don't feel called in that way, but if it is something that I wanted to do, I'm not opposed to it. I also I'm super sensitive in regards to anything that I consume. So it's like I just feel like even if I take a small amount, if my body needs healing, it might just go there and I've got to like freaking do work. Like I've got to
I
function.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I've done ayahuasca and just the first dose, I couldn't even make it to the second dose. I'm like, I probably should have taken half. It it activated instantly. So yeah,
Everything.
my body's super sensitive too.
Yeah. So I 2.5 years ago was my first ceremonies in Bali. It was probably 7 months after that that I did mushrooms again,
Okay.
within the States.
Yeah.
And then November of last year was the first time that I did Bufo. Have you heard of Bufo?
What's that?
So it's also a frog serum similar to Combo,
Okay.
but it is DMT, so
Okay.
psilocybin. It's like its own different kind of like beast, and also it becomes like a serum, and then you inhale it through a pipe, and it hits you instantly, and it only lasts about 20 minutes, and it's basically been considered like 5 times stronger than ayahuasca because it just kind of like debilitates you like immediately, and like you're not conscious. Like, I mean, you're conscious, but you are gone. And but the
So
thing is, it's
are
only a
you
20
like
minutes.
laying down? Like,
Yeah.
okay, you and then
So you would directly go to a medicine woman or a medicine
right.
person for that who will then be allowing. And if you are carrying a lot of trauma, and since I had been navigating and healing sexual abuse, that was one of the bigger pieces for me. Your physical body could be doing a lot of somatic releasing.
Okay.
Um, and then you mentally, I mean, it is just like traveling. Oh my gosh, it's just mind blowing.
That is
So
so interesting.
it's really powerful. And I would only recommend doing it after you've experienced something
Some
like,
type of plant medicine.
yeah,
Yes.
100%. Because if I hadn't experienced other healing ceremonies prior to that, that experience would have just totally made me flip my lid because it was just,
Like scared.
yeah, it's only scary because you're not like consciously awake. You're totally just gone completely, and you're so vulnerable, right? Because you're not aware of what's happening. And what's beautiful is if you do this with such a beautiful person who can guide you
Yes.
through it, they can then help you acknowledge what happened in the physical, and then you can navigate what happened mentally, and then that can hear, like, you can kind of piece together all of the
Yeah.
parts. It's very powerful. It's a very, very powerful medicine. I haven't gone on an ayahuasca journey. I was going to go last September, but then Peru didn't open up its borders
Yes.
because this whole pandemic. So that got canceled. But then when I did do mushrooms in last September, ayahuasca energy came to me through the
Ah,
mushrooms.
I
So
love
that's
it.
where I say, like, you don't actually have to be taking a specific plant. Like, if you're meant to receive that energy for healing, you will
I
receive it,
agree.
and you'll
Yeah.
know it in your heart. Because if somebody would have just told me this prior to experiencing that, I would have been like, whatever, dude. But
Yeah.
legit, it was like so clear as day as it was happening, and I was just like, oh my gosh, because it was completely different experience than my other mushrooms experiences. So I
Right.
knew the energy was completely different. And then since I did the Bufo, that was a huge deep healing, and there was a long time in between them. And that's the other thing. I don't feel like you're supposed to be doing plant medicine like every month or every two
Agreed.
weeks or anything like that. Like, I feel like you'll know when you're called. So then it was another, I would say, 7 months, when I went to kind of a larger sacred overnight mushroom healing ceremony with other people, which was deeper in my healing experience, where I was a bit more comfortable having, say, like 15 people who were also
Right.
experiencing during the moon, and we had other shamans there, and it was a really beautiful experience. And then I did Bufo one more time after that, and then I haven't done anything since. And again, for me, I think it's kind of like maybe twice a year, like every 6 months, maybe
Right.
eight
Right.
months and then sometimes it's every 2 years. It just depends on your healing journey, and also the other work that you're doing in between the ceremonies. Like,
Which is so
are you
important.
yeah, are you doing therapy in some way, or are you doing inner work in some way? Are you doing
Right.
emotional releasing in some way? Like, are you doing something? And I think the in between is where that's so much of that healing is happening. And then the plant medicine is like a tool to kind of thrust you a bit further and kind of bring up maybe some of those deeper, darker things that you may not be acknowledging or aware of, but the in between
Absolutely.
8 months or year or 2 years, like you still have to be doing inner work. Like that's,
Yeah.
I did daily breath work for like 7 months, which was just awful. But if I hadn't done so much of that healing on my own, my plant medicine journeys probably would have been just, I don't even know, like just,
Right.
so intense in general. So I
Well, and if you
think
don't do the integration, you're going to pop back into that old programming. It's like the plant medicine, yes, gives you this boost, but now you got to integrate it so that becomes like your new frequency, your new template.
absolutely. And so it's like, say 2 weeks after you have plant medicine, you're back in the real world, you're navigating, you're going to the grocery store, life, maybe you have kids, whatever it is, but then you're feeling some of those emotions that you felt on plant medicine, like that fear is bubbling up within you. Okay, well, that fear is bubbling up because there's still layers that need to be shed. So,
Right.
what are you doing in that day? Like, do you have a group that you can go to and lean on for support? Like, are you doing some kind of tapping or Reiki healing? Are you doing breath work on your own? Are you going into meditation and asking deeper questions? You have to acknowledge every emotion, every piece, every trigger that comes about, especially, within the weeks following plant medicine, because those are still where the healing is happening. Those are still the
Absolutely.
pieces that you're holding on to. And so if you disregard your trigger and you dive into a bottle of wine, well, you're not allowing the plant medicine to do what it is supposed to be doing. You again are
Yeah.
falling back into suppression and avoidance and numbing and all of that stuff. And that's the whole point of moving past. Like, you have to allow it to still do its job.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you so much for popping back on. This is going to be so helpful. Um, and thanks for sharing your experiences because a lot of people don't know where to start. They're afraid or they just want to jump in head first. So this was so
Absolutely.
helpful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.